important topic. As a state institution, it's very imperative that we manage carefully the public funds that go into all aspects of the research here, from the infrastructure and that is part of your teaching and your basic research, as well as your funded research. With that, I'm going to try and manage turning on my slides for everyone, so bear with me. Let's see, there we go. And hopefully everyone can see that. There. And with that, I'm going to start with a little background. So the university is committed to research excellence and conducting research that changes the world, changes the country, through scientific discovery, and translating that into marketable products or resources, like some that may be licensable. And everyone is doing some really unique things. Certainly Scott, some of his work is first in his area. And there are, though, inherent risks and conflicts in translating research that is developed with public funds as part of the public university into private business and private profit. And so that's really where the whole conflict management plan process comes in, to manage this inherent risk so that our researchers, as they look to personally commercialize on their research, they're protected, and we document that their efforts are appropriate and within the terms of state law. So a couple just general principles when working with university, working at the university, and I'm speaking particularly to folks who are employed here. And certainly some of this comes into play when there's collaboration and production of IP across multiple institutions. But these comments and pointers are really for folks who are faculty here and then looking to commercialize the intellectual property they help develop. You really want to make sure that the time you spend for the university is for the university. What you're doing separately does not interfere with your obligations to the university. And that's similar, all resources. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what are university resources. But making sure those resources are not used without appropriate agreements in place for their use. The university needs, cannot, benefit an individual. And so there's, lots of steps involved in making sure, we don't provide that appearance that we are benefiting any one individual. And so, Scott, Scott, feel free to
I'm going to just chime in and I'll try and add color commentary throughout and not interrupt Terrell too much. But I think it's important to point out here for everyone that if you're a university faculty member or staff, this is fundamentally different, because what you do as your day job and what you might do in a company commercial setting overlaps tremendously. I mean, this isn't like I'm starting a hamburger joint on the side and I need to be careful about my day job and that I'm not using university resources. 99% of the time, the commercial enterprise that is potentially in conflict directly overlaps with what your day job is. And so this is a much more complicated and nuanced. And as a result of that, I think you're almost always inherently in conflict. I mean, I'm using my UAlbany email address for all kinds of things, my UAlbany computer, my UAlbany lab. It's the basis for my research. So there's an inherent overlap in a university setting that I think is pretty unique. This isn't like GE, where I may have a side company that I do part-time hobbies or something. This is fundamentally different, and I think it just really applies in a unique way to most of the people that are on the call today.
And that's a really good point. And that use, you know, there are revocable use permits that are necessary for, for that, for the use of IT resources, for the use of space, that, I know Scott has in place, and that folks would um, need to have in place as part of, the inherent conflicts. And this is how it's managed. Um, it really comes down to making sure, the institution is not giving away the public's resources that have been devoted to it for personal gain. And, really that is the key thing to think about when going about any of these activities. How do you make sure, you're managing them separately as, best you can, in coordination with the university, so that, we know what's going on and we can, help you in identifying how it can be managed. And this is, gets to reporting your financial interest, and a couple of key things to be aware of. A lot of, what's required reporting, how we manage these plans and enter into agreements. They're governed. It comes out of regulations promulgated in public officers law, and the ethics requirements there. Public officers law applies to all state employees, including faculty. And so there are restrictions on coming before the agency you work for and getting a personal or a commercial benefit for your company. And so this is, where a lot of the management plan, as well as for the patents and invention policy, and then RF's own policy and code of conduct. Similarly limits RF employees from using their position for personal gain. And then, so this kind of gets to defining, what is an external interest. It's anything outside of your obligations for the university is going to be considered an external interest. And that's where, the management needs to be, and overseeing that those external interests aren't interfering with your fulfillment of obligations, whether it's for teaching, whether it's for research. And that, when it's research, there's not a risk to, the integrity of the research. Certainly, we understand, and that's one of the interesting aspects of this kind of position you're all in, because, we understand you don't want to impinge the integrity of the research. That's going to hurt the business, that's going to hurt the university. And so a lot of the controls in place here are to be able to document and show, should the question ever arise, and that things were done appropriately, that the research does have integrity, that, the public, resources that have gone into it have been used appropriately. Scott, do you want to say anything on, how you
Yeah,
manage
I'll
integrity?
I'll make a couple comments here. And so, I only know a few of the people on the call here, but I'm going to make some assumptions. One, that your university faculty are associated with the university in some setting. And that what you're looking at in this slide is not a list of things you're not allowed to do. The way I've approached Terrell and his office and conflict management is they are not saying you can't have conflicts. And when I said earlier, and I believe this, I think it's almost impossible not to have conflicts developing technology within a university and trying to commercialize it. The whole point is to disclose those conflicts and then work with Terrell's team to come up with a management plan. The point is you can have conflicts, they just have to be managed to minimize the damage that can be done to the university, but more importantly to yourself. I mean, this is all protective measures. So every one of these things you can do, you just have to do it in a way to minimize the potential risk and conflicts. And that's what this is all about. So it requires that the individual, the investigator, be really upfront and integrated. You do harm to yourself if you hide things. You want to be more forthcoming and more disclosing with any potential conflict. I mean, haven't ever viewed my role to mitigate my own conflicts. That's not my job. My job is to disclose my conflicts and then work with the conflict management group to mitigate that. And I think it's just a good place to start. But this is a great list of things that I'm guessing is not uncommon to have faculty members do one or more of these. And the university actually wants you to do these. These are appropriate activities. So, I think there's an inherent risk aversion to engaging with your office, Terrell. And that's not the way you want to engage. You actually want to be very active and proactive and positive. This has been a very positive experience for me, and I realized I had a lot of conflicts that I didn't realize were conflicts. So it's my
No,
shameless plug
and
for the group.
no, thank you, Scott. And you're absolutely right. These are not a list of items you cannot do. These are a list of items we need to manage how you do them. It's not necessarily, an instant no, it's how can it be done so that, all the other, standards can be met, and again, echoing Scott's, comments, this disclosure process is really about protecting you as faculty. What we're seeing more, on the federal side, when folks apply for funds, if they do not disclose, an arrangement, an appointment with another institution or a private business, and they are awarded a contract, and the feds later find out that something was not disclosed, they may seek to end that contract and then come after the researcher for potential criminal acts under false claims. So it's really important to, work with myself, work with my team to disclose all of your outside interests. Some of these, there may be very little actual management needed, depending on the nature of what it is. But certainly anything where you are starting a business, looking to use university IP as part of that, that's going to be a much more involved management process.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can disclose too much. And I think in many cases, just the mere disclosing of the information is all that's required. You've now protected yourself. As long as the appropriate individuals know about it and it's in writing, you've protected yourself. So yeah, disclosure is what it's all about, really, at least from my perspective. Managing it is secondary.
Yeah, disclosure comes first. Management, is, it may be secondary. I agree. It's, the primary focus, but it is, an equally important focus when it's needed. And that is for the management committee, to, really work with you on what's needed. Let me move on. And so now I want to kind of go over what are university resources. And we get a lot of questions about that during this process. And I think the first, and probably something that's fairly, usually fairly clear, is the intellectual property, that you develop as part of doing research here at the university. The university owns a portion of those rights. And then when you're looking to commercialize, it's necessary to negotiate with the university for use of those rights in the commercial enterprise. And this is where public officers law really kind of dictates that negotiation process. We can't be perceived as providing favor, and as public officers, folks cannot come before their own agency for personal, asking for a personal benefit. And public officers also, extends that beyond your employment by 2 years. That's really where the whole process of having a business partner or a hired attorney, we've seen all manner, work with the university on the negotiations. Keep you as faculty, as staff, separate from that process, and meeting the public requirements of the public officers law. The institution absolutely is looking to commercialize, but we are also looking to commercialize for the best outcome for the IP, which translates to better returns and licensing terms for you as a PI, and for the public. And then so getting back to the discussion of space, and so resources is really good at space, equipment, email. All of this is held under a university resource, and so generally the university needs to be compensated for that if it's going to be for a commercial enterprise and be more than an incidental use. Certainly sending an email every once in a while to schedule a get together that's outside your university obligations, it is not something where a permit may be required. But when you want to use university, your email conducting business, this is when agreements and revocable permits need to be in place. And again, this is, biggest thing is absolutely disclosure, making sure that, when going through this process, we're able to look at that and judge, is this something that can be managed appropriately with appropriate agreements? And, how that can move forward. I will say, I always recommend people do not use their university email, if at all possible. One thing to remember is the university is subject to FOIL, the Freedom of Information Law. So anything held on university servers, can be subject to FOIL request. Now, there may be other, reasons why the university can accept it from disclosure. But when it's your private business, I recommend not going down that road to begin with, if it's not absolutely necessary. And then really the place to start. So a lot of folks I know, they start with an SBIR or STTR award, and starting with sponsored programs on those is a good spot. And that's then you're working with the university to pay it for, say, your time, for the resources necessary to perform, the university portion of that work. Scott, I know you've worked with several faculty and set up SBIRs, STTRs. You want to speak to anything of that?
Well, so for a little background, we have a spin-out company. We have several SBIRs and STTRs. The difference between the two, STTRs are designed to actually, you have to have an academic partner. So they're designed to have a company work with the university, and university gets between 30 to 60% of the funds. So they're designed for spin-out technologies. But as part of my company, I have my own email accounts. I pay a facilities use agreement for access to equipment and space, like Terrell was talking about. There's a lot of built-in infrastructure support to make sure that what you don't want to have is essentially running a company out of your own lab. That's where you can get in a lot of trouble, and a lot of universities do that, but the optics are terrible and it doesn't work well. And so there's walls put up in place to try and safeguard against that. I mean, it's an essential funding mechanism for early stage startup companies. Very often you'll get phase one and even phase two grants. It's great money because it's non-dilutive, equity based, and so um, and the university is really encouraging our faculty, UAlbany in particular, to go get these types of grants. But how then you implement them is complicated. It's even more complicated when the subcontract. So these are grants that go to the company. You have to be a for-profit entity to be eligible. So the university does not get the grant. Um, the startup company gets the grant, and then the university has a subcontract. So the money goes to the company, then the company pays the university. So I get invoices from the Research Foundation for my subcontract. My sub is to a colleague of mine, another UAlbany faculty member. It is much more complicated when you try and wear the hat of being the company part, PI on the company side, and the PI on the academic side. That there is instances where that happens, but that's really, really complicated, and the conflicts go way up, especially when you start talking about students. But yeah, and we can talk about more of this, but the important thing is Terrell and his office have decent domain knowledge of how to navigate this. There is plenty of examples within UAlbany's community of funding through the NIH and NSF for these types of programs with startup technology of RF IP. One other thing, just to make, I think, a subtle correction, the Research Foundation owns any intellectual property that, as a SUNY faculty member, you invent. 100%, not part. They own it. You have the right to license it. As an inventor, you share in some of those proceeds, but inventors within SUNY do not own their technology unless it's been released to them from the Research Foundation.
Thanks, Scott, for that clarification. That is an important fine point. Let's see.
And that's pretty
gets to-
standard at all universities. There's
Yes.
nothing unique about SUNY. I mean,
Yeah.
I think
And
some
no,
some
you're right, exactly right. I'm just going to pipe in here that Terrell mentioned rights, Scott mentioned ownership, and they are two different things. So the university and the RF on behalf of the university owns IP you create, and we can grant certain rights in that IP to your business, to your business. So it's ownership versus rights. The owner can grant rights to you to do what you need to do with the technology.
Yeah, and so Josh, you said you just got an office action, is that correct? Congrats, by the way. That means you have a provisional patent that's being acted on by a
They're
patent.
taking you seriously. It's a badge of honor.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, office action is the first step in the process, but when you look at your patent application, you're going to be listed as an inventor along with the other inventors, but there's the assignee. The assignee is who the patent is owned by, and that's the Research Foundation, and that's the working relationship that SUNY has, and it's a good working relationship. Because trust me, when people want to infringe on a patent, if they see Josh as the owner, they'll just infringe. But when they see the Research Foundation, it's a little bit more intimidating. But that's your partner in this, and yeah, they can assign you some rights. Our company has the exclusive rights to commercialize our technology, and that's usually the way it works. And indeed, as Terrell pointed out, that was all negotiated at arm's length for me. I wasn't allowed to be part of that, and that was to protect me and the university.
Great. Yeah, next, I want to talk about students and trainees, and really this applies to employees as well. But the more common situation we've seen is researchers looking to involve their students, and this is something where again, work with us. We will find ways that this this can be managed. What ultimately needs to happen or cannot happen is that the student's education suffers, or have the appearance of the student's education suffer. So generally speaking, if, researchers who want to involve their students, there's going to need to be a new faculty advisor assigned, someone who's really there for the student, and the student knows who they can talk to if they have concerns. Should any problems arise, that their academic progress is not hindered by work for the company, that they're coming in, they're getting their degree, they're meeting their obligations, and they are protected in, as part of this. It can be a great educational opportunity about how do you run a business, what is being involved in a private enterprise like, but we also want to make sure there are protections that we are not appeared to be taking advantage of those students when this comes up. There it is that inherently unequal relationship, and so that's why we are very cautious. This applies similar to, say, an employee you may supervise, but those are less rare. What we see a lot with those are employees who also look to have an interest in the company, and then we would, they would have their own management plans, and we'd have, we work out, who's going to, generally supervise all the individuals, at the one company, try and streamline that process too, so that when there are individuals who from the university who look to form a company, and we have one oversight manager generally within your department as the chair, dean, depending on the specific situations, who oversees and really is there on the day-to-day to ensure that all obligations are being met.
So I'm going to jump in here and comment quite a bit about students. And there was a question about students, which is a complicated thing to answer. I'm going to try and answer it as best as I can, but I think Peter and some others may chime in. So first, let's talk about students as inventors. So students fall into a couple categories. There's undergraduates taking courses, and then there's students doing research, either undergraduate or graduate students, which are by definition doing research. So first, let's take students that are discovering or inventing as a result of a course they're doing. So if a student within SUNY or UAlbany in particular invents something, has new IP, as a result of a course, SUNY's policy is actually different. SUNY allows the students to have ownership. So if you invent something as part of a class, specifically, they're paying to take the class, then they have the right to actually own that IP. I don't think it's particularly in their interest. That means they also have the right to have to pay for it and maintain those patents and enforce those patents. So it sounds like it's a good thing, but it's actually a bit of a hardship. But they have those rights. So if they disclose to Pete's office that, hey, we got this invention, Peter's office would eventually say, okay, well, this is, you can manage this however you want. We might do it for you. Anyway, and so that's even if they're using resources, because they are by nature taking a class, they are enrolled as a student, and when they did their discoveries, they have certain rights that are fairly unique. Graduate students are different. They're working with an investigator on RF, Research Foundation based work. And so they're treated more or less like staff and faculty. Their IP is assigned to the university as part of their work obligation. Again, it's in their best interest. But like my graduate students, they could not be independent inventors working on the project that I have in my lab without having it be assigned to the university. And the latter portion, and so that's to answer the question that was in the chat. And then with what Terrell's saying, students are just really complicated. It's a inherent unequal relationship. And as a faculty mentor, it is not just in my interest, it's essential that I protect myself from what could possibly go wrong with a graduate student. So the interest of the student needs to be protected, but I need to protect myself. So graduate students in particular are really complicated. They tend to get squirrely the longer they're graduate students, the more they're likely to think they should be graduating. So, I've seen this, fourth, fifth, sixth-year graduate students insisting they graduate. And maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they're not ready. And if they're working on research that I, as a faculty member, but as a relationship to the company stands to financially benefit from. When I tell them you're not ready to graduate or no, you can't graduate yet, what they might hear is that I'm making them stay and do work so that I can financially gain from this. Or they may have some other complaint against me that they may think I am doing something inappropriate. And they need to have someone they can go to mitigate that type of conflict and talk to that protects me. So this is no different than male dentists now needing to have the door open or someone else in the room with them when they're working on a female. It's to protect them. And so my students, regardless of whether they're male or female, have secondary advisors, mentors, they're written into my conflict management plan. The names of my students are in my conflict management plan by name, saying that they have secondary advisors that they can go to, and I let my students pick who they want, and then they can go to them if they have a problem. And that protects me and it protects the student. And I think, a very smart and obvious and tangible example of how you can mitigate real conflicts. There is the real potential for conflict, and it does happen. Students can voice all kinds of concerns, and that these are real situations that can get really ugly really fast. And so basically you just have to treat students and basically everybody else involved too, but students in particular in a unique way, and they have to be involved in the process. Sometimes they can get their own conflict management plan, but as I said, my students are bootstrapped to my conflict management plan. And that has to change if it changes. I get a new student, my conflict management plan is dynamic. If my relationship with the company changes, if my students change, if anything changes that's relevant, I need to let Terrell know, and then we change and tweak our document. It's not one and done.
Yeah, and Scott, that's a really important point that everyone, all these management plans are, I would consider them living documents. They're updated as situations change, as you might get an award or, bring on new investors, bring in, new collaborators. It starts with the disclosure. The management plan is how we document the management process, and they're absolutely living documents. That as situations change, we look to update them. And
before we move on, we do have 2 questions in the Q&A. The first one is for Scott. Somebody wanted to know if do you have and use separate computers for your company work and checking company emails?
Yes and no. I do have a separate computer for the company, and more importantly, my people that work for the company, so I have employees, absolutely use their own computers. Mostly I use different email providers and services. So like I buy all my own, this is all through GoDaddy, Microsoft suite of tools, things like that. I use all of those are company owned so that I can use them when I'm doing company things. And I have a separate university. It's the university paid for PC. And then I have a separate computer for myself. So I try and respect that as best as possible. That gets a little complicated because of the way you use those types of devices, but it's more the other things. I can document where I'm paying for all the behind the scenes services. I have my own Dropbox account, iCloud accounts, those types of things. And that's actually good for the company. Those are good things for the company to be paying for. But I do have a facility use agreement, which lets me straddle that fence a little bit better. Like I use equipment that is university equipment, but I pay a monthly charge to be able to do that.
All right, awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. The second question is from Josh. It's a 2-parter. So Josh's company is applying for an SBIR. His company employs a number of UAlbany interns, including TAs. They're students, not faculty, and as far as he knows, there is no overlap. His team members agreed to disclosure and assignment to the company at hiring. So the first question is, with this context in mind, should they make a management plan with your office, Terrell? And then
Yeah.
the second question is, what does a high-level background IP management plan look like if they were to bring on a faculty member to license university IP to be used with his own? Let me know if I got that right, Josh.
Wait, and I have some questions first, and then Josh, you need to have a one-off. You need to sit down and spend some time with Terrell. So just as a fun fact, I was in Terrell's office for literally a couple hours, the first intake. And then my conflict management plan took months to finally get to a final version that worked well. So, my involvement is extensive, and you should expect yours to be too. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But it isn't something simple that you just do quickly and get done with. If you're going to do it right, it takes some time and do it right. So you said lots of things that were like red flags for me. So first, SBIR. You've got to start. You need to have a real company that has a DUNS number and tax ID to even be eligible to submit one of these. So that's a yes to that. Okay. Secondly, SBIRs, you would be ineligible to be a PI on an SBIR. You would only be eligible for STTRs from the NIH. And so are you not the PI on this grant?
No, I am. I mean, it hasn't been fully like we've written it.
That's what I thought. So you're intending to submit. So yeah, you need to take a big step back and get up to speed on what you can and can't do, because you can be in violation right away of several. There are New York state officer rules. They are NIH and NSF rules, and then you don't want to find that out after you put all the effort in and while you're trying to submit it. They would find it out when they go to fund the grant, and they'd say, actually, we can't. So Terrell's office and actually other people on this call can help fill you in on what the best way to go after this type of money is.
Scott,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify that Josh is not a UAlbany employee.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Who are you?
Excelsior though?
I thought you were UAlbany faculty.
No. In the beginning I mentioned. Sorry, I showed again.
Yeah, well, then you can apply to SBRs all you want.
All right.
The student thing actually,
with you guys regarding the interns and the TA.
Yeah, I think a separate meeting would probably be good just to really understand the situation. And then, so you're here with our incubator program?
These are speed interns. We're looking to do the incubator program very soon. I'm literally about to apply for a business loan so we can join you guys over there.
Okay, yeah, so, I'll probably work with Kelly and folks. We can coordinate and get into some more details of, how that may need to look. What kind of agreement we may need in place for that.
Yeah,
the question's really complicated, especially if they wind up being inventors. I mean, if they're inventors, they're inventors. It's not a subjective, right? They're
exactly
objective.
Yeah.
And who their rights would be, you're going to need a nuanced discussion to figure out who owns the rights to that.
Yeah.
Right.
As far as I know, it doesn't interfere with anything they're doing. Like I gave them my IP and let them run with it. And anyone that, those have completed the internship and they still work here as advisors, like they get stock in the company. So, I mean, I do, they're going to be named as inventors if applicable, and they get some ownership of the company. But if I need to do anything else, and this is the first I've heard of this because our other internship programs are through, well, I did hear a little bit about this in I-Corps, but I didn't think it would apply until just what you were saying now, but our other internships are from private universities.
Okay, yeah, so it's, each institution as well is going to have its own IP policy and how it's handled. We'll be able to work out with UAlbany. You'll want to probably start talking to the other institutions where you have interns from and how they handle it when the individuals are interning through the university program.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. So with that, I've got some contact information up on screen. Also, if folks want slides, happy to share them. And Jillian wanted to make sure there's plenty of time for questions.
Yes, thank you, Terrell and Scott. We'll take questions if you'd like to unmute yourselves or continue to add them into the Q&A.
While we're killing time, I will partly answer something else you asked, Josh, and we should chat at some time. I want to hear what's going on with you. You asked about faculty members who may get involved. So one way in which we deconflicted my position as CEO, co-owner of a company, and as a faculty member. So if I invent new IP, who owns that? And how do I decide whether I'm working for the company when I came up with the idea or the university? So to deconflict that as part of my conflict management plan and what has now become standard operating procedure within SUNY as a whole, so the Research Foundation adopted this approach, is that any invention I have, regardless of whether I'm working for the company or the university, by default, I disclose to Research Foundation, and I assign my rights over. So I essentially have already decided that I don't have to navigate that complicated pathway. Essentially, I think we felt it would be impossible unless I was documenting, exactly when I came up with the idea. And even then, how do I prove I'm not, manipulating it to bias my own outcome that I want? So we just circumvented the entire thing, and that greatly deconflicted me. I don't have to play that game. I always disclose to the RF. And if they want to release it and say we're not going to own it. So in addition, as part of my licensing agreement, the company gets right of first refusal. So automatically it's assigned to the RF. The company gets right of first refusal, in which we can navigate that essentially with using the same language that we have for our existing license. So it's a win-win, and I don't really lose on that. And I think that's the standard policy. So if you brought faculty on board, probably that would be the way they'd need to navigate it. And as opposed to being outright consultant, they'd have to be an employee of the company and be able to demonstrate that while acting as an employee of the company, they came up with an invention that is exclusively the company's, and RF has no access to it. You probably have to safeguard that and have that in writing. When it goes south is when it's worth a lot of money, right? 10 years down the road, it's worth a ton of money. And then RF finds out, wait a second, that was an invention from our faculty member. You'd want all that written down to protect the company and the faculty member.
Do you navigate that, Scott, with your employees as well? So
That's a question.
taking away the right. Yeah.
So no, my employees, of which there aren't many, but an employee, and I'm looking at hiring a new informaticist with just this in mind. I mean, if they're strictly an employee of the company, their assignment rights are to the company. So I view myself like no different than GE, and that's written into their employee contract. And so what would normally happen, and this is what's in the process of happening, is we got a new disclosure. I'm an inventor, and I have an employee that is also an inventor. The employee's rights are assigned to the company. My rights are assigned to the Research Foundation. And then I can assign the company's rights to the Research Foundation as the secondary, so that RF can not only bear the brunt of the cost, you're welcome, Peter, but also be the big boy on the patent, which I think is a little bit more intimidating than having our company name on it. The company name would still probably be on it, but having the Research Foundation for the state of New York, State of University of New York, looks really good on a patent, a lot better than some little peanut company that could easily get put out of business. So that's how we navigate it. Yep. Company employees' rights go to the company, but they have to be exclusively company employees. They're not students. They're not TAs. They're employees or contractors for the company.
But does that, do you find with like VC investors or anybody looking to invest in the company, they see that as a positive or negative when you assign the rights?
A little bit of both, a little bit of both. And they do ask this. They want to know what your IP plan is. And so going forward, who has the rights? So it's not a major impediment to probably early investment, but big time, like by the time we'd be going for a Series B, 100 million raise, something like that, or maybe even a big Series A, They would be wanting the company to own the patents outright. And so there would have already been a discussion with Pete's group to, okay, we're no longer licensing, how much for the patents? And we would then own them, RF would bow out. But that, our company's nowhere near that stage.
Yeah.
So at that point, it would be an impediment. You're trying to do a Series B round and you don't actually own your IP. There's no way you're closing on a Series B. So that would have all been taken care of earlier. And RF's smart enough to realize that's their best interest. They'd sell you the patents at that point. But they're not cheap. It's going to cost a couple $1 million to buy your patents. And you have to have a company that's financially in that position to do it. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah. Early stage, it's not an impediment.
These are all great questions that resources at the Innovation Center and at the Research Foundation can help with.
I'll add a little more color to that, John. So a recent pitch, I was involved with a small venture group. They actually wanted to see disclosures when they asked what's my RP plan. I said, we're in the process of continuing to disclose and prosecute new provisionals. And because our oldest patent only has 5 years left on it, and they wanted proof. They want to see the actions from the Research Foundation that they're continuing to prosecute the IP. So it wasn't a detriment at all. They want to actually see it. So that's how much they are not only interested in that you're continuing to throw follow-on patents, but they didn't have an issue with RF being involved at all.
Cool.
Looks like we have a question from Evan. You want to unmute, Evan?
Yeah, I have a kind of specific question. I know I've been back and forth with Peter in the past about kind of this open source software. I don't believe it's IP or patentable from my conversations with folks thus far in the Innovation Center, but just sort of struggling to find a way to disclose this, open source software that was developed outside of my role as a doctoral student and RF employee. I'm in the counseling psych department, so I sort of bring my own software development skills to the work that I'm doing, but it's not in my job description and hasn't been developed with university resources. And so looking at the portal for disclosure, it doesn't really seem like there's a home for my current situation in the Innovation Center and the disclosure process. And so I'm just sort of curious, you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, like the issue is as you maybe get 10 years down the road and it's, starting to become more profitable, that's where problems can occur. And so that's where we're sort of at, is in customer discovery round 2, more honed in and really planning out what development of a company might look like, some of the legal documents and whatnot, meeting with folks. And so we're in that stage where we could move forward in 6 or 8 months, but we're reluctant to move forward until we have some kind of written document that sort of is a release of, I guess, IP or not IP, or not really sure where this fits in, it being sort of open source developed software.
So I think that's a really interesting question. I think that's, might be a further meeting with, Pete's office, possibly Kelly. Because if this is something that was developed outside of your university responsibilities without university equipment, it's likely not something, university's gonna, be able to pursue, but I understand wanting to document that. Question of, is it copyrightable? May not be patentable, but it may be copyrightable. These are all things that, really best to discuss with, particularly Pete Gonslick's office. We're happy to follow up though and get something on the table so you can get a final determination. Follow up with a meeting request or something.
Okay.
And Brett, who's on the call as well, is actually an expert in kind of this area. You may want to talk to him as well. Shout out to Brett. And it sounds like one of the first things you really need to do is figure out what your IP is. I mean, you have IP. It's what is the nature of what you need to protect. How you protect it depends on what it is. It sounds like you're doing that through customer discovery. But once you have a hard idea, a pretty firm idea of what is it that is the nature of your intellectual property, for it to be valuable, it needs to be protectable. And so then I think it is worth exploring what you can do to protect it as best as possible. That's what the investors want to know before they're going to invest. They want to know, yeah, but how do you protect this? Whether it's know-how or trade secret, you can do a lot of database patenting, even with open source stuff. How you handle the code, you can patent, and that's usually worth something. Yeah, Brett's an expert on this, and there's some others at the university that can help as well.
Gotcha, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think the closest thing to IP we have is post-trained open source AI, large language models using data that was generated by me, basically. And so it's I guess the data and the post-training process.
And it was generated as a university affiliated individual or separate from the university?
So generated separately. So this is just like clinical notes, essentially, fake clinical notes that I've just generated, off of simulated sessions, so to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, still worth having a discussion. And
yeah, definitely worth getting into the details of everything and,
Yeah. So I can send an email, again, out. I know we're sort of in the process, Pete, of figuring out what to do, and other folks are looped in, but I can just send another email just to see about meeting up to see what steps we can take to move forward. But thanks for the info.
Sure.
Any other questions with a few minutes left?
John, what's the status of your company? Yeah, you got actually Brett's got a question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Brett.
I do have a follow-up question for Scott, but it's highly technical, so.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it. Thanks for the shout earlier, Scott. Just so the folks here know, I know Pete dropped off as well, and it's good to see some RISE participants in here with Human, Rob Breen, and Scott. So just as an FYI for those of you dying to know, tech transfer in our office, the Office of Economic Development, Entrepreneurship, Industry Partnerships, work hand in hand. We're not the same office. So Evan, to your point about software, and that's becoming more of a hot topic, given our AI capabilities here at UAlbany. I'm not asking or recommending that you send an email and copy the world on it, but we have some really nice collaborative inroads. It starts with Kelly in our office, and so Maria and Nancy in our office as well. We work, and Terrell and Laura as well have been fantastic in this. But it's best because we've really done a nice job connecting dots here to help you navigate this. And I think it goes best to Scott's earlier comment about conflicts of interest. It's more of, you don't even know if you have a conflict of interest, and it's great that we're here to help you navigate it. It's not more to say to Terrell's point earlier, like, we're not telling you no, but we're helping you navigate this. So the resources are in place. I'm happy for everybody here to connect the dots on that. So not a question, more of a general comment about how we can connect the dots here at UAlbany to help you out, Evan and others as well.
Thanks, Brett. John, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, Scott, company's going well, just resubmitting an STTR in the next couple of weeks. Highly technical question is, do you find the Microsoft from GoDaddy useful?
Yeah, I find all their suite. I have Adobe as well. I mean, I buy basically all the software that I need through them as an add-on to the cost of having the domain name. We have our web server through them. They're kind of decent one-stop shopping.
Yeah,
they just constantly inundate me with new names and dot whatever for my URLs. So
okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, they're pretty user-friendly. I mean, it gets expensive, but it's an appropriate expense.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether to use that or something else, so that's fine. Cool.
All right, with that, I guess we'll close it out and say thank you again to Scott and Terrell. And if you have any questions, please do follow up with us. Any of us can connect you to any of the others. If you can only remember one of our emails, we'll definitely get you in touch with everyone you need to be. So have a great afternoon, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Nice job, Terrell.
Thank you. You too.